Hi, friends. Have you ever found yourself somewhere you never planned to be, just because your heart needed something you couldn't name? On a rainy afternoon in Vermont, Grace pulled off the road and stepped into an animal rescue. Still grieving, still lost. Never imagining a gentle golden retriever named Sunny would change everything. This is a story about second chances, tiny acts of courage, and the quiet healing that grows between two souls learning to trust again. If you've ever hoped for a new beginning, I hope this story touches you. Share your thoughts below, like or subscribe if it moves you, and let's begin. Grace was driving the old Subaru, hands clenched tight around the steering wheel, wipers working overtime. Outside, the maples and birches stood stripped and shivering, leaves scattered like old regrets along the roadside. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't want to read, invitations she didn't want to accept, apologies she wasn't sure she was ready to forgive. She'd told herself she was just out for groceries, but something deeper was tugging her forward, turning left when she meant to turn right, until she found herself in the parking lot of Maple Valley Animal Rescue. The sign was crooked, painted with bright blue letters, standing stubborn against the weather. Grace cut the engine and just sat there, watching the water bead and race down the window glass. She hadn't planned this. Not today. Not ever. She was still mourning, still feeling hollowed out by loss, and the idea of filling that space with anything new seemed impossible. But she'd been driving for over an hour, and maybe she just needed to get out of her own head. Inside the rescue, the air was thick with the scent of wet dog, old newspapers, and that undefinable sadness that lingers in places full of lost souls. There were cages along both walls, volunteers moving quietly, voices low out of respect for the anxious, the hopeful, the heartbroken. Grace wandered slowly, the sound of paws shifting on concrete echoing beneath the flicker of fluorescent lights. She stopped by a cage at the end of the row. A golden retriever crouched in the farthest corner, fur dulled and patchy, eyes round and dark, and so full of something it made Grace's breath hitch. The little card read, "Sunny, female, 4 years, shy, needs patience." Sunny's body trembled as Grace knelt down, a low whine barely audible over the storm outside. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. Grace felt the prickle of goosebumps along her arms, the old ache in her chest stirring again. She didn't know this dog, didn't know her history, didn't know why the sight of her felt like standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. Maybe fate decided for her that afternoon, or maybe she'd been searching for Sunny long before she knew her name. A volunteer named Jen appeared at her elbow, her smile gentle. "She's a sweet girl," Jen said, voice quiet. "Just needs time. She's had a rough go. Came in after her family moved and left her behind. She hasn't really let anyone close since." Jen hesitated, glancing at Grace as if she could see through her calm, well-worn mask. Sometimes the ones who need the most are the ones who have the most to give, if someone's willing to try. Grace didn't say yes, not right away. She asked questions instead. How long had Sunny been here? Was she good with people? Did she have any health issues? But all the while, her eyes kept drifting back to the trembling golden dog, to the way Sunny's gaze would flicker toward her and then away, as if hope itself was a dangerous thing. Outside, thunder rolled and lightning flashed, illuminating the rescue in harsh white. The power flickered, and for a heartbeat the entire place was plunged into darkness, the animals falling silent except for one shaky bark from the far corner. Grace's heart pounded as the lights stuttered back to life, casting everything in a strange, otherworldly glow. Jen offered to let her take Sunny out to the play yard, a patch of muddy grass ringed by a sagging wooden fence. Grace hesitated, then agreed. The volunteer clipped a leash to Sunny's collar, coaxing her gently from the kennel. The dog's legs shook, nails scraping on the concrete as she followed, each step a tiny act of courage. The rain had led up to a drizzle by then, the world outside slick and shining. Grace knelt in the wet grass, patient, letting Sunny come to her in her own time. A robin darted across the sky, raindrops gleaming on its feathers. The dog sniffed the air, wary, taking slow, careful steps closer. Grace spoke softly, sharing the story of a childhood dog named Bailey, of quiet mornings and shared secrets, of losing her husband last fall and wondering if she'd ever feel whole again. Something in her voice must have reached Sunny. The dog edged closer, nose quivering, tail low but no longer tucked. Grace reached out, offering her palm. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with trembling certainty, Sunny pressed her nose into Grace's hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was as small and tentative as hope itself. Back inside, paperwork was signed in a blur of nerves and second thoughts. Grace almost backed out, her hands shaking so badly she could barely write her name. But Sunny leaned against her leg, a subtle, desperate plea, and that was enough. They left together, the rain washing the world clean behind them, neither fully sure what came next, but knowing that for the first time in a long while, they weren't entirely alone. Have you ever brought something fragile home, only to realize the weight of your decision as soon as you crossed the threshold? Grace felt it the moment she pulled into her driveway. The old farmhouse, normally her refuge, seemed suddenly too big, too quiet, too full of the ghosts she'd managed to keep at bay with chores and routine. Now, with Sunny curled small and tense in the back seat, everything felt uncertain. Grace opened the car door slowly, the metallic click sounding too loud in the twilight. Rain still dripped from the gutters, splattering onto the porch steps. For a second, Grace just sat, watching Sunny watch her, two souls unsure if they belonged anywhere at all. Eventually, she coaxed the dog out, using the same gentle patience she'd offered in the play yard. Sunny hesitated, paws slipping on the wet gravel before letting herself be led inside. The house was filled with a hush that seemed to press in from every corner. Grace switched on the living room light, its yellow glow barely softening the shadows. She set out a bowl of water and a small dish of leftover chicken, but Sunny only sniffed at it, her tail flat against her side. Instead, the dog slipped under the kitchen table, curling so tightly she nearly disappeared. Grace busied herself with the practicalities: towels by the door, a borrowed dog bed near the fireplace, her late husband's old flannel shirt draped over the couch for comfort. She moved quietly, aware of every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of wind against the windows. But her mind raced. Was she ready for this? Could she help a soul as broken as her own? As the night deepened, thunder rumbled far off in the hills. The house felt even emptier than usual, the silence broken only by the tick of the clock, and now and then, a tiny whimper from beneath the table. Grace tried coaxing Sunny out with treats and soft words, but the dog shrank away, eyes wide, flinching at every movement. Grace made tea, hands trembling, and stared at the steam swirling above the mug. Doubt crept in like a cold draft. What if she couldn't do this? What if she failed Sunny the way she sometimes felt she'd failed herself, or her husband, or even her grown daughter, Anna, who called from Boston every Sunday to check in but never stayed on the line long enough for real conversation? Was she rescuing Sunny, or just selfishly trying to fill her own empty spaces? A sharp bark from the street startled them both. Sunny scrambled, hitting her head on the underside of the table. Grace's heart squeezed at the sight. So much fear in such a gentle creature. She remembered the rescue worker's words. Sometimes the ones who need the most are the ones who have the most to give. But what if she wasn't enough? She left the bedroom door open that night in case Sunny wanted company. Lying awake, Grace listened to the storm's slow retreat, the wind rattling the window panes. Memories flickered in the darkness. Laughter at the kitchen table, a fire crackling, a warm hand on her shoulder. She pressed her palm to the empty pillow beside her, whispering her husband's name just once, quiet enough that only the walls could hear. Downstairs, Sunny crept out, inching toward the fireplace. She paused, nose lifted, scenting the air. The borrowed dog bed seemed foreign, so she circled twice before settling on the flannel shirt, as if she could still feel the kindness woven into its threads. Grace heard her. Soft pause on the rug, a hesitant sigh, and smiled into the dark. Maybe this was what healing looked like, she thought. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just two hurting souls, alone together, sharing a fragile peace. Somewhere past midnight, a car horn blared in the distance. Sunny whimpered, and Grace's feet hit the floor before she realized she'd moved. She padded quietly down the stairs and found Sunny staring wide-eyed at the window, her whole body taut with fear. "Hey, it's okay," Grace whispered, sitting cross-legged on the floor, palms open. She didn't try to touch the dog, just waited, letting her presence be its own comfort. For a long minute, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Sunny's body uncoiled. She inched closer, pressing her head, just barely, against Grace's knee. Grace held her breath, afraid any movement would break the spell. But Sunny didn't pull away. They stayed like that, listening to the wind, two hearts learning each other's rhythms. Grace felt the heaviness in her chest ease, just a little. Not gone, but lighter somehow. Dawn broke gray and uncertain. Grace made coffee, the familiar ritual steadying her. She found Sunny asleep on the flannel shirt, belly rising and falling, ears twitching in a dream. There was a plate of untouched chicken in the kitchen, a reminder that trust doesn't come in a day. As the first rays of sun slipped through the clouds, Grace sat at the kitchen table with her journal. She wrote, "Night 1. Both made it through." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tiny hopes, Grace realized, can be enough to carry you through the hardest nights. That morning, as Grace sipped her coffee and Sunny dozed by the fire, something unspoken passed between them. A truce, a promise, the quiet beginning of something neither had dared to imagine. Some mornings, the sun comes up without asking permission. It slides in through the curtains, bright and unapologetic, and for a moment, everything in the world seems possible. That was how the next few days felt for Grace, a fragile kind of hope, shimmering just out of reach. She woke early, listening for sounds from downstairs, half expecting to find Sunny gone, like a dream that vanishes with the dawn. But each morning, Sunny was there, still curled on the flannel shirt, still wary, but present. That presence became the first gift they gave each other. Grace didn't rush. She moved quietly through her routines, making coffee, opening windows to let in the fresh Vermont air, setting out food and water without expectation. Some days, Sunny ate a little. Other days, she just sniffed at her bowl, as if considering whether trust was worth the risk. Grace started keeping a journal, something she hadn't done in years, She'd always loved words, loved how they could capture moments too slippery to hold. Now, her notebook became a tally of tiny victories. Sunny took a treat from my hand today. Tail wagged just once. Flinched at the toaster but didn't run. Every little step mattered. It was as if she and Sunny were learning a new language together. One built of patience, soft voices, and the gentle offering of space. Still, the house was full of hesitation. If Grace moved too quickly, Sunny vanished beneath the table or retreated to the shadows by the stairs. If the doorbell rang or a truck rattled past on the road, the dog's body stiffened, every muscle tensed for flight. Grace found herself tiptoeing, softening her voice, turning down the radio so the world outside wouldn't intrude too much. One afternoon, as rain drizzled against the kitchen windows, Grace sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, a handful of treats on her palm. She waited, not speaking, just breathing. Sunny watched from across the room, ears pricked, tail curled tight. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the steady beat of rain on glass and the slow rise and fall of Sunny's chest. Finally, with a tentative step, then another, the dog crept forward. Her nose touched Grace's hand, a feather-light brush, and then she darted back again, as if she'd crossed an invisible line and needed to regroup. Grace smiled, tucking that moment into her heart. This was their dance, approach and retreat, hope and caution, over and over again. Some days felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. On harder days, it was 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But each time Sunny returned, a little braver, a little less afraid. The old farmhouse, once so silent, began to fill with new sounds. Sunny's nails clicking on hardwood, the soft whoosh of her tail when she circled her bed. Gentle whines, sometimes, when a noise startled her or a memory lingered too long. Grace responded with patience, reading aloud from her favorite books, humming lullabies she remembered from childhood, speaking her husband's name into the quiet so he'd never be forgotten. Neighbors called to check in, some offering advice, others just wanting to make sure Grace was all right. "Takes time, you know," said Mrs. McAllister from next door, handing Grace a tin of oatmeal cookies. "Some scars you can't see." Grace nodded, thinking how true that was for both her and Sunny. Some evenings, when the sky turned lavender and the wind rattled the branches, Grace would sit on the porch, Sunny at her feet. She'd tell stories about her childhood summers on Lake Champlain, about her daughter's first piano recital, about the Christmas she got engaged beneath falling snow. Sunny listened, head tilted, eyes gentle and wise. Sometimes Grace imagined the dog understood every word, but the doubts crept in too. One night, after a particularly tough day, Sunny had growled at a sudden noise and refused dinner. Grace let herself cry. She sat on the cold kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, tears falling silent and steady. "Am I doing this right?" she whispered to the darkness. "Will she ever trust me?" The only answer was the steady tick of the clock, the sound of her own breathing, the soft rustle as Sunny crept closer, close enough that Grace could feel her warmth. It wasn't just the dog who was healing. Grace felt something inside herself shifting too. She caught herself humming in the mornings, noticed the way she lingered over coffee just to watch the mist rise from the fields. She hung wind chimes on the porch, laughing when they startled Sunny at first, then calmed her with gentle words until the dog stopped flinching at every breeze. Progress was slow, sometimes painfully so, but it was real. One morning, Sunny let Grace brush her golden fur just for a minute. The next day, she accepted a piece of apple from Grace's hand. small things, but monumental in their own quiet way. And always, at the end of each day, Grace wrote it all down. Today, Sunny met the mailman and didn't bark. Sat with me while I read. Let me scratch her ear, just once. If you've ever hoped for healing, you know how precious these small victories can be. Some days, they're all that keep you moving forward. And so the days passed. Some bright, some gray, some lonely, but none quite as empty as before. Grace and Sunny, still dancing their dance of hesitation, still reaching for trust, found themselves, slowly, gently, beginning to believe in second chances. Some changes creep in quietly, like the first green of spring poking through leftover snow. For Grace and Sunny, the rhythm of their days settled into something almost peaceful, if still a little fragile. But the world outside kept turning, and soon it was time for a visit from Grace's granddaughter, Lily, a spark of life neither of them knew they needed. Lily arrived on a Saturday morning, bursting through the door with a squeal and a cloud of purple backpack, rain boots, and energy. "Grandma!" she shouted, arms open wide, her smile infectious. The old farmhouse echoed with a joy that hadn't visited in a long while. Grace bent to hug her, feeling the years melt away with the strength of that small embrace. Sunny, caught off guard by the excitement, froze in the kitchen doorway. Her ears went flat, and she took a half step back, eyes darting between the strangers in her territory. Lily spotted the golden dog and clapped her hands. "Is this her? Is this Sunny?" she asked, voice full of hope. Grace nodded. "She's a little shy, sweetheart. We have to go slow." Lily's face lit up with determination, a 6-year-old's version of patience. She crouched low, setting her backpack on the floor, and extended her hand the way Grace had taught her. "Hi, Sunny. I'm Lily. It's okay if you're scared. I was scared the first time I slept over at Grandma's, too." The truth in Lily's words was simple and pure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sunny took a careful step forward, nose twitching as she inhaled the scent of rain, crayons, and strawberry bubble gum. Her tail gave a tentative wag. Grace felt her chest loosen, tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying slipping away with that small gesture. Lily settled in as if she'd never left. She filled the house with laughter and questions. Why is the sky blue? Do dogs like peanut butter? How many steps to the barn and back? Her energy swept through every room, rattling the dust from corners Grace hadn't visited in ages. After lunch, the three of them went out to the backyard, the grass still spongy from last night's rain. Lily wanted to show Sunny her favorite trick, a cartwheel perfected during quarantine months stuck inside. She kicked her legs high, tumbling across the yard, giggling as her boots flew off. Sunny watched, head cocked, unsure whether this was play or something to be wary of. Lily rolled onto her back, breathless and muddy. "Come here, Sunny. Want to try?" she called. Sunny hesitated at the edge of the porch, eyes flickering to Grace for reassurance. Grace knelt and patted the earth beside her. "It's all right, girl. We're just having fun." Tentatively, Sunny crept forward, paws leaving faint prints in the soft ground. Lily, still lying on her back, reached out slowly, palm up. Sunny sniffed her hand, then pressed her nose against Lily's cheek, a feather-light touch that made the girl giggle louder than ever. Grace's eyes prickled with tears she didn't bother to hide. That afternoon, they made cookies in the kitchen. Lily spilled flour everywhere, and Sunny tried to lick up a stray egg before Grace could intervene. "No, Sunny," she laughed, and the dog startled, but Lily only grinned. "It's okay. She just wants to help." The moment could have ended in panic, but instead laughter bounced off the walls and the scent of baking sugar filled the air. As evening fell, Lily curled up on the couch with a book, patting the cushion beside her. Sunny hovered nearby, ears up, uncertain but drawn to the gentle rhythm of Lily's voice. Grace watched, heart full, as Sunny finally jumped up, awkward and hesitant, and lay at Lily's feet. The girl read her favorite story aloud, her voice soft and melodic, and Sunny's eyes slowly closed, lulled by the sound and warmth. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, Grace stood at the window and looked out at the night. Fireflies blinked in the darkness, and the air was sweet with honeysuckle. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt alive again, not just with noise, but with hope. The next morning, Lily and Sunny invented a new game. Lily would hide her favorite stuffed rabbit somewhere in the living room, and Sunny, nose twitching, tail wagging, would try to find it. Each time she succeeded, Lily showered her with praise and gentle pats. Grace couldn't help but join in, laughter bubbling up so easily it startled her. The days passed in a flurry of board games, pancake breakfasts, and walks to the pond. Each moment, Sunny became a little braver, a little more present. She learned to catch tennis balls, though she preferred to just chase them and flop down in the grass. She followed Lily from room to room, curiosity blooming where fear once lived. On Lily's last night, they sat on the porch together, wrapped in old quilts. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air humming with the low chirp of crickets. "She's happy, Grandma," Lily whispered, head on Grace's shoulder. "I think she likes us." Grace squeezed Lily's hand and nodded, too moved to speak. After Lily left, the house was quiet again, but not empty. The echoes of laughter lingered, woven into every room. Sunny still searched for her new friend, nose pressed to the door, but she no longer hid in the shadows. She waited, tail thumping, for Grace to join her. Something inside both of them had shifted, and Grace knew with certainty. Sometimes joy sneaks in through the back door, changing everything before you even notice. Some moments seem ordinary, until the world tilts and you realize you'll never forget the sound, the smell, the way your heart crashed in your chest. For Grace, it happened on a brittle winter night, a night that began with laughter and ended in panic. The wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of snow and wood smoke. Grace and Sunny were curled up on the couch, a rerun flickering on TV, both content after a dinner of chicken soup and scraps. Outside, the yard was blanketed in silver blue, the kind of snow that glows under the porch light. Grace watched Sunny doze, her chest rising and falling, and felt a soft peace settling over the house. One she hadn't known in years. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. From somewhere down the road, fireworks exploded, sharp, violent cracks that echoed off the hills. Grace jolted upright. Sunny's eyes snapped open, wide and terrified. Another burst lit the sky with a flash of color, then another. The dog leapt from the couch, nails skittering on hardwood, ears flat, eyes wild. "Sunny, it's okay," Grace called, but her voice was lost beneath the booming. She reached for the dog, but Sunny darted away, crashing into the table, knocking over a lamp. Grace scrambled after her, panic rising. Sunny bolted for the back door, unlatched just a moment before for fresh air. The wind caught it, swinging it open. In a blur of gold, Sunny shot out into the darkness and vanished. For a heartbeat, Grace couldn't move. Her body felt frozen, blood roaring in her ears. Then she was on her feet, grabbing boots, fumbling with her coat, calling Sunny's name again and again. Snowflakes swirled in the cold air, stinging her cheeks. Grace rushed onto the porch, scanning the yard, the fields, the woods beyond. Nothing but silence and snow, the fireworks still cracking, distant now, like a cruel joke. She called her neighbors, voice shaking. "Sonny's gone. She bolted. She's terrified of the fireworks." Mrs. McAllister was the first to answer, promising to drive around the block. Mr. Hanley from the next farm over said he'd check his fields. Word spread through Maple Valley in minutes. Soon, headlights bobbed along country roads. Voices called out in the night. Flashlights danced across drifts and ditches. Grace searched for hours, her boots filled with snow, fingers numb, throat raw from shouting. She trudged through the orchard, down to the pond, even out to the old barn. Every shadow looked like Sonny. Every rustle of wind made her heart leap. She replayed the moment in her mind again and again. What if she'd latched the door? What if she'd held the dog a little tighter? What if? At midnight, she staggered home, exhausted, hope slipping through her fingers. Inside, the house was colder than she'd ever felt it. Grace rummaged through a drawer and found her late husband's old scarf, worn, soft, still carrying the faint scent of aftershave. She bundled it up with Sonny's favorite toy and set them on the porch, a silent prayer that maybe, somehow, Sonny would find her way back by scent or by love. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She sat by the window, lights burning, eyes fixed on the darkness. She texted Anna, her daughter, confessing what had happened. Anna offered comfort, but worry threaded every word. Grace fought back tears, guilt gnawing at her. The emptiness in the house felt alive, thick and suffocating. The next morning dawned gray and bitterly cold. Snow drifted against the porch steps. Grace forced herself up, poured coffee she didn't drink, and bundled up to search again. Neighbors called with updates, but no one had seen a flash of gold, no paw prints in the fresh snow. Strangers joined in, mail carriers, dog walkers, even kids on sleds. They all knew Sonny's story by now. They all wanted her home. On the second night, a storm rolled in, wind howling, snow falling harder. Grace stood on the porch, scarf clutched to her chest, whispering Sonny's name into the storm. "Please come home, girl. Please." The house behind her felt emptier with every passing hour. But sometimes, hope hangs on by a thread you can't see. On the third morning, as Grace sat on the steps, shivering and heartsick, a shape appeared at the edge of the yard. At first she thought she was dreaming, the world gone fuzzy with lack of sleep. Then, clear as sunrise, Sonny staggered out of the woods, her golden fur dusted with snow, ribs showing, limping but alive. Grace bolted toward her, boots slipping, arms wide. "Sonny!" she cried, voice cracking with relief and disbelief. The dog collapsed at her feet, tail thumping weakly. Grace dropped to her knees, sobbing, cradling Sonny's head in her lap. Sonny's nose burrowed into the old scarf, and she let out a deep, shuddering sigh, the sound of fear breaking, of safety found at last. Neighbors gathered, cheering, hugging, some crying. Grace thanked each of them, voice thick with gratitude. She came home. She found her way. That night, as she and Sonny curled up by the fire, Grace knew she would never forget the terror of losing her, nor the miracle of her return. The world kept spinning, but everything had changed. Grace saw her community with new eyes, strangers willing to search the dark for a lost soul, neighbors who showed up in the storm. Sonny slept at her feet, finally at peace. The world had stopped for a moment, but it had also started again, brighter and stronger than before. The ordeal of losing Sunny in the snow changed more than just Grace's nights. It changed the rhythm of her entire world. As the community rallied, searching side by side, Grace realized that some wounds, no matter how old, could begin to heal in the light of kindness. And in the days after Sunny's miraculous return, that kindness multiplied in ways she never expected. Grace bundled Sunny in blankets, rubbing warmth into her frozen paws, her own hands shaking with relief and leftover panic. The vet checked her over. Nothing broken, just a sprained leg, hunger, exhaustion, and a few scratches. Grace whispered thanks with every gentle touch, promising that this time she'd never let Sunny slip away. For the next week, she barely left the dog's side, carrying her up the stairs, hand-feeding her boiled chicken and rice, dabbing her wounds with the same care she used on Lily's skinned knees years before. The phone rang almost non-stop. Friends called to check in, neighbors brought casseroles and dog treats, and people Grace barely knew dropped off cards and flowers. The postman, who joined the search after his route, handed Grace a thermos of hot chocolate one morning and smiled shyly. "I've seen her walking with you. She's a special dog. I'm glad she's back." Grace nodded, surprised by the sudden lump in her throat. Something in the town shifted. People who had always nodded from a distance now lingered to chat, sharing their own stories of lost pets and long nights. Mrs. McAllister admitted she still talked to her late husband's old beagle sometimes. Mr. Hanley told Grace about the cat he'd rescued as a boy, how it used to wait for him on the fence post every day after school. Their stories wove together, a patchwork quilt of loss, hope, and quiet resilience. As Sunny healed, she seemed to sense when someone else needed comfort. One afternoon, while Grace baked pies for a neighbor's fundraiser, she heard a knock at the door. It was Jenny, a young woman who'd just lost her father. She'd come for advice on paperwork, but as she sat at the kitchen table, her hands shook and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Without prompting, Sunny limped over and laid her head in Jenny's lap. Jenny's breath hitched, then steadied as she stroked the dog's golden fur. Sunny's empathy grew with every passing day. She'd curl up beside Grace when a wave of loneliness hit, nudge a visiting child's hand when they seemed sad, and even greet the delivery driver with a cautious, friendly tail wag. Grace started to realize that the dog who once needed so much protection now offered it, quietly, instinctively, with a wisdom all her own. Inspired, Grace decided to do something she hadn't done in years: invite the neighbors for dinner. She wanted to thank everyone who'd searched the woods, knocked on doors, or just kept her company in those anxious hours. She called it a thank you supper and told herself not to worry if only a few showed up. But on the night of the gathering, the house overflowed with laughter and stories. People arrived bearing pies, casseroles, loaves of fresh bread. Kids tumbled into the living room with Lily's old board games, while grown-ups clustered around the kitchen island, swapping tales of pets and wild Vermont winters. Grace set out extra chairs and found herself smiling so much her cheeks ached. Sunny, now mostly healed, wandered among the guests. She accepted gentle pats, shyly at first, but grew bolder with each kind word and soft hand. She even sat by the fireplace with old Mr. Bernard, who'd lost his wife the previous spring and rarely left his house. The sight of him gently stroking Sunny's head while recounting stories of his youth brought tears to Grace's eyes. After dessert, Grace stood and raised her glass. The room quieted. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Not just for helping me find Sunny, but for reminding me what community really means. It's easy to feel alone these days, but you've all shown me how kindness multiplies when it's shared. Someone called out, "To Grace and Sunny." Glasses clinked. Laughter rolled through the house like spring thunder. Later, as the last guest left and the house settled into a peaceful hush, Grace curled up by the fire with Sunny. She stroked the dog's fur, feeling its warmth and softness, and realized how much she herself had changed. She no longer saw herself as broken, but as someone pieced back together, stronger at the mended seams. Sunny, too, had changed. She still startled at loud noises, still hesitated before trusting strangers, but she greeted each new day with more courage than the last. The two of them, once separate and hurting, had grown into something bigger, a pair, a family, a small part of a larger, healing whole. From that night on, Grace made a habit of reaching out. She organized monthly suppers, started a book club, even signed up to volunteer at the animal rescue where she'd first found Sunny. Her world grew wider, brighter, filled with faces she now called friends. And through it all, Sunny was by her side. A living reminder that kindness, offered freely without expectation, could heal even the deepest wounds. Their days were still far from perfect. Some mornings, memories still stung. Some nights, the wind howled and Grace woke sweating from old dreams. But now she faced those moments with a different kind of courage. She knew she wasn't alone. And sometimes, when the night was quiet and Sunny lay curled at her feet, Grace would close her eyes, breathe deep, and whisper, "Thank you for coming back to me." The dog would thump her tail, as if to say, "I was never truly lost. I was just finding my way home." Winter loosened its grip, and the world slowly softened. Drifts of snow shrank beneath the Vermont sun, grass pushing through in hopeful green patches. The air tasted fresher, scented with thawing earth and the promise of change. For Grace, every sunrise felt a little less heavy. For Sunny, each day brought another reason to step out of the shadows and into the light. It was Lily's idea first, something she'd heard about in school. "Grandma, did you know some libraries have dogs that listen to kids read? It helps the shy ones," she explained one afternoon, sprawled across Grace's kitchen floor as Sunny dozed nearby. Grace smiled, picturing her anxious golden retriever lying quietly among a group of children, soaking up stories. There was a sweetness to the idea, a second chance not just for Sunny, but for children whose voices trembled with uncertainty. Grace called Maple Valley Library. The director, Mrs. Connor, was thrilled. "We've been hoping to start a Reading to Dogs program. Sunny would be perfect, especially after all she's overcome," she said, voice warm. After a few gentle meet and greets, Sunny's calm presence won everyone over. She wore a blue scarf and a badge that read, "Library Listener," her tail wagging shyly as kids gathered in a circle around her. The program blossomed. On Saturday mornings, children, some eager, some hesitant, filed into the sunny reading nook with picture books and chapter books clutched to their chests. Some struggled over every word, blushing when they made mistakes. But Sunny, curled on her blanket, simply listened, her steady breathing and soft eyes offering patience no teacher could replicate. A boy named Eli, small for his age and nearly silent in class, became a regular. He brought the same battered dinosaur book each week, sitting close but never quite touching Sunny. At first, his words came out in whispers, the sentences halting, but Sunny didn't mind. By the third week, Eli's hand rested on her back as he read, the tremble in his voice fading to quiet confidence. When he finished, he pressed his cheek to Sunny's fur and whispered, "Thanks for listening." Grace watched from the corner, heart swelling. Word spread. Parents lingered in the hallway, sharing stories and coffee, their children racing inside to find their place by Sunny's side. Volunteers joined in, organizing snacks and craft tables, building a little community around one gentle dog who had learned to trust again. Spring brought new beginnings in other ways. Grace, inspired by the warmth that had taken root in her heart, joined a local dog-walking group. At first, she was nervous, uncertain whether she and Sunny would fit in among the experienced handlers and boisterous pups. But on their first walk along the river trail, surrounded by laughter and the jangle of leashes, she realized they belonged just as much as anyone. Sunny trotted beside Grace, nose twitching at the scents of mud and moss, tail swaying with growing confidence. She made friends with a three-legged collie named Jasper, and even managed to share a sniff with Molly, a grumpy pug who tolerated few. Grace struck up conversations with strangers who quickly became companions, other people who understood loss, change, and the ways animals could stitch broken things back together. With each walk, Grace felt the seams of her life tighten and mend. She laughed more, at Jasper's attempts to herd ducks, at the way Sunny rolled in the first patch of spring grass, at her own rusty jokes. There was a lightness in her step, as if the world, once weighted with grief, had given her permission to hope again. One afternoon, after a long walk, the group paused at a picnic table near the park. Someone asked how Sunny came to live with Grace, and she told the story. How fate or loneliness or something bigger had led her to the animal rescue that rainy afternoon. As she spoke, others shared their own stories, of shelter dogs who taught their owners patience, of cats who curled up beside broken hearts, of friendships born from shared walks and shared worries. As the weeks passed, Grace noticed other small miracles. A neighbor who'd always kept to herself adopted a shy beagle. The mail carrier, once hurried and stoic, began tossing dog treats from his pocket, greeting Sunny by name. Even Anna, Grace's daughter, found herself calling more often, sharing snippets of her busy life in Boston and promising to visit soon with Lily for another long weekend. The ripple of Sunny's healing spread outward. She'd been a spark, a reason for others to open their doors, their lives, their hearts. And, as word of the library program reached the local newspaper, families from other towns drove in to meet Sunny, to ask how they might help an animal in need. Adoption rates at the Maple Valley Animal Rescue climbed. Other libraries called, wanting to start their own programs. It seemed impossible, and yet, Grace had seen it happen with her own eyes. At home, the farmhouse thrummed with new energy. Grace planted flowers along the porch, their colors riotous against the old white siding. Sunny lounged in sunbeams, paws twitching as she dreamed. Friends stopped by for coffee or for nothing at all, the walls echoing with stories and laughter. Some evenings, Grace would sit on the steps, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching the world settle softly around her. Sunny rested her head on Grace's knee, eyes full of quiet trust, and Grace felt, down to her bones, that she and her dog had not just survived, they had begun again. Sometimes all it takes is saying yes once, Grace realized. Yes to a second chance, yes to a stray dog, yes to a trembling child in a library nook, yes to hope, even when it feels like the hardest word in the world. And as spring turned the world green and bright, Grace and Sunny walked forward, together, unafraid. Some afternoons, when the sun dipped low and painted the Vermont hills in golden brushstrokes, Grace would settle onto her porch with a mug of chamomile tea and Sunny at her feet. Those were the moments she cherished most. No rush, no expectation, just a warm breeze, the scent of fresh earth, and the quiet knowledge that peace could be something you built day by day. It was during these pauses that Grace began to notice a subtle shift inside herself. The sharp edge of loss that once haunted every corner of her farmhouse had softened, replaced by something gentler, quieter, a kind of wisdom that arrived not with answers, but with acceptance. She found herself thinking about the path she'd traveled, from sorrow to hope, from loneliness to laughter, from fear to trust. Each day with Sunny had added a thread to that tapestry, bright and sturdy as the morning sun. One evening, Lily called from Boston just as fireflies began to blink in the grass. "Grandma, did Sunny learn any new tricks?" she asked, her voice full of childhood excitement. Grace smiled. "She's learned the most important trick of all, how to be patient. And she's teaching it to me too." There was a pause on the line, then the sweet sound of Lily giggling. "Dogs are the best teachers," she declared. Grace found herself agreeing. For so long, she'd tried to force herself past the pain, to hide her sadness behind chores or busy work. But Sunny's gentle, steady presence reminded her that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about making peace with what couldn't be changed. On the porch, as the last sunlight slipped away, Grace watched Sunny doze, chest rising and falling in a rhythm that calmed her own heartbeat. The lessons Sunny offered came quietly, often when Grace least expected them. One Saturday, while walking the library trail, a sudden storm rolled in. Wind whipped through the birches, sending leaves spinning and tossing dust in wild eddies. Children scrambled for cover, parents called out, and Sunny, never fond of thunder, tucked herself close to Grace's side, trembling but determined to stay. Grace knelt in the wet grass, arms around her dog, whispering, "It's okay, we're together," until the thunder faded and the world grew still. Afterward, as the sky cleared and a rainbow arched over the valley, Grace realized that courage didn't mean the absence of fear. It meant facing it with someone by your side. Sunny didn't chase away the storm, but she didn't run from it either. They waited together, and that was enough. Grace saw this lesson reflected everywhere. At the library, children who'd once hidden behind parents or books began sitting a little straighter, speaking a little louder, encouraged by Sunny's unwavering attention. Some brought gifts, handmade cards, a shiny collar, a drawing of a golden dog beneath a smiling sun. Parents lingered to thank Grace, but she always pointed to Sunny, saying, "She's the brave one." Sunny's quiet bravery inspired Grace to try new things, too. She took up painting again, brushes and canvases gathering dust for years in the attic. Her early attempts were clumsy, sketches of barns, blurry portraits of horses, but she kept at it, letting the process matter more than the result. One afternoon, lost in her work, she felt a warm nose nudge her elbow. Sunny sat beside her, tail swishing, and Grace realized the dog was content just to be near, no matter what the outcome. On another evening, Grace was invited to speak at the rescue where she'd first found Sunny. She nearly declined, old shyness rising in her chest, but she thought of all the families waiting for their own second chances, all the animals longing for home. She wrote her speech at the kitchen table, practicing in front of Sunny as the dog cocked her head and listened. The night of the event, her voice wavered at first, but the sight of Sunny, calm and proud beside her, steadied her nerves. "I thought I was rescuing a dog," Grace told the crowd, her voice clear. "But the truth is, Sunny rescued me too. She taught me patience and hope, and that loving again, no matter how hard, is always worth the risk. That speech rippled outward, drawing more volunteers and foster families to the rescue. Grace met people from every walk of life, teenagers seeking purpose, retirees searching for company, couples starting new chapters. Each story different, each need unique, but all bound together by a belief in second chances. At home, life moved with new rhythms. Grace tended her garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil. She cooked dinners for friends, laughter echoing across the porch as fireflies danced in the twilight. On quiet mornings, she and Sonny strolled the meadow, the world hushed but alive, the rustle of grass, the chirp of a robin, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. One day, while weeding the flower beds, Grace heard Sonny's distinctive bark, sharp, urgent, full of purpose. She looked up to see the dog nudging a toddler who'd wandered from a family picnic next door, gently herding him back to his startled mother. "Thank you," the woman breathed, hugging her child tight, and Grace's heart swelled with pride. Wisdom, Grace realized, often arrived in small, unremarkable moments. A quiet afternoon, a walk in the rain, a dog's gentle nudge. It was less about erasing the pain and more about learning to live with it, to make room for joy and sorrow side by side. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Grace sat on her porch with Sonny at her feet. The world bathed in soft light. She thought of all the things she'd learned from a dog who couldn't say a word. Patience, hope, the courage to try again. Most of all, she understood now that healing was not a destination, but a journey of small kindnesses, offered and received, day after day. And as dusk settled around them, Grace felt the weight of old grief lift a little more, replaced by the quiet bravery of loving and being loved, again and again. Grace often thought about the story everyone liked to tell, that she had rescued Sonny, that she had changed the dog's life and given her a second chance. Neighbors and friends repeated it so many times it nearly became true, embroidered into every conversation, celebrated at every community dinner. But on quiet evenings, as she sat on her porch with the golden retriever's head heavy on her lap, Grace realized the truth was far more complicated and infinitely more beautiful. She hadn't just saved Sonny. In fact, looking back, she saw how much they had saved each other. The signs were everywhere, woven into the fabric of their new life together. In the beginning, each had been a little broken, both hesitant to trust, both walking carefully through a world that had already hurt them. Grace could see it so clearly now, how she had tiptoed around her grief, shrinking from memories that ached too much to touch, and how Sonny had shivered at loud noises or sudden movements, cowering as if love itself could be dangerous. But as the months slipped by, a new story unfolded. They began to move through the world side by side, learning together that it was okay to risk a little, to reach for something better even when the past weighed heavy. Sonny still startled sometimes, especially when the wind slammed a door or a distant car backfired. But now, she looked to Grace, trust flickering in her eyes, then settling into certainty. On those days, Grace would kneel and open her arms, and Sonny would run to her, every muscle trembling, but believing she was safe. It made Grace wonder. Had she ever really believed in safety before Sonny came into her life? Their morning walks became sacred rituals. Together they wandered country lanes laced with sunlight, past barns draped in vines and fields wild with wildflowers. Grace marveled at how Sonny would slow to greet every child at the bus stop, how she'd pause to sniff the hands of shy neighbors. her gentle eyes inviting connection. One morning, a man named Howard, stoic and withdrawn since losing his wife, waited at his mailbox just to hand Sunny a treat. "She makes the morning feel lighter," he confessed, voice rough, eyes bright with gratitude. At the library, the reading program became a cornerstone of the community. Children who once clung to their parents now walked in with books tucked under their arms, eager to share new stories with Sunny. Even the shyest voices grew steady and sure, bolstered by a listener who never judged a stutter or a skipped word. Parents wrote thank you notes, teachers sent emails, and the principal herself dropped by to observe the magic. Grace felt proud, but humble, always giving credit to Sunny. As these small miracles multiplied, so did acts of kindness throughout Maple Valley. Families opened their homes to foster animals. Neighbors brought food to those recovering from illness. Friends gathered on weekends to repair the playground, planting flowers and repainting faded swings. Grace saw a network of care knitting itself tighter, each thread woven stronger by the example of one golden dog and her ever-expanding circle of friends. In her own heart, healing took the shape of tiny choices. She called Anna, her daughter, more often, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to share stories about Lily's adventures or Sunny's latest antics. The conversations grew less tentative, more honest. Grace apologized for old silences, and Anna, in turn, shared her own struggles, the worries she'd carried about her mother's sadness. They cried together, laughed together, and Grace realized that opening her door to Sunny had also opened the door to her family. One chilly morning in early autumn, Grace and Sunny set out for a walk and found the park bustling with neighbors setting up for the Harvest Festival. Banners fluttered, kids dashed about with painted faces, and the scent of apple cider floated on the breeze. Someone called out, "There's Sunny!" And a cheer rose from the crowd. Children rushed over, clamoring for a turn to pet her, while adults thanked Grace for all she'd done. She felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, humility, a pinch of disbelief. Just a year ago, she would have slipped quietly through the festival, smiling politely but holding herself apart. Now she was woven into the tapestry, a thread in the vibrant fabric of Maple Valley. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and laughter drifted through the golden light, Grace and Sunny walked home slowly, savoring every step. Grace knew she would never be the person she was before loss, nor did she want to be. She had learned that the greatest acts of courage were not always loud or heroic. Sometimes they were quiet, stubborn choices. To open your heart one more time, to trust again, to risk love even when you know how much it can hurt. Sitting on her porch that night, with Sunny pressed close, Grace thought about the people and animals she'd seen transformed by kindness. She understood now that healing was not a destination you finally reach, but a journey you travel with others, one step, one story, one gentle act at a time. The community around her was stronger, bound by love and loss, hope and second chances. And Grace knew, deep in her bones, that neither she nor Sunny had rescued the other. They had simply found the courage to walk forward together, to choose light after darkness, again and again. Every autumn now, Grace's home overflows with life. It's the kind of warmth you can feel before you even open the front door. The low hum of voices, the barking and laughter drifting out into the crisp October air, the sweet scent of cinnamon apples and wood smoke curling through open windows. It is a house that welcomes everyone, especially those who carry the weight of old losses or hope quietly for a new beginning. On a Saturday afternoon, Grace stands on her porch, mug of cider in hand, watching as Lily chases Sunny through a scatter of fallen leaves. Other children join in, tumbling over the lawn, their shrieks of delight mixing with the happy barking of dogs. Some are neighbors, some are friends, and some are faces that Grace first met through the library, the rescue, or just a chance encounter that turned into something more. Each one, in some way, has been touched by the story of a woman and her golden retriever who learned, together, that love is an act of courage. In the kitchen, pies cool on the windowsill. A group of parents gathers around the table, sharing stories and swapping recipes, while others settle in the living room, surrounded by games, books, and the comfort of old quilts. The house is crowded and noisy, but Grace would not trade the chaos for the silent ache she once carried. She moves from room to room, a hand on a shoulder here, a quick embrace there, never taking for granted the ordinary miracle of a full house. Outside, the air is bright with the laughter of children and the rustling of leaves. Someone starts a game of tag, and even the dogs seem to sense the invitation to play. Sunny is in her element, no longer the anxious, trembling dog Grace first met, but a gentle queen of her own backyard, running, leaping, stopping every so often to check on a younger child or coax a shy puppy into the fun. She is the heart of the gathering, the reason for so many of the new friendships and traditions that have taken root. Later, as dusk falls and families linger for one last cup of cider, Grace gathers everyone in the yard for a group photo. It's become a tradition. Parents, kids, dogs, all clustered together in a patchwork of flannel, denim, and wool, faces flushed from laughter and the cool air. Someone jokes that the dogs outnumber the people, and no one seems to mind. As the camera flashes, Sunny is front and center. Lily's arms wrapped tight around her neck, her tail a golden blur. After the crowd disperses and the house quiets, Grace sits on the porch steps with Sunny curled beside her. The stars are just beginning to prick the sky, and the night hums with the memory of all that has happened here. Every story, every heartbreak, every hesitant step toward something new. Grace sips her cider, savoring the tart sweetness, and listens to the contented sigh of the dog at her side. She thinks about the journey, the rain-soaked afternoon that first brought her to the rescue, the sleepless nights of doubt and fear, the slow, uncertain days that followed. She remembers every setback, every breakthrough, every lesson learned in the company of a dog who spoke not with words, but with quiet trust and steadfast presence. If you've ever loved a dog, Grace thinks, you know that they don't heal you with grand gestures. They do it with a steady gaze, a gentle nudge, a willingness to sit beside you in the dark. They remind you again and again that you are never alone. Not really. And if you have ever been saved by a dog, you know that sometimes the smallest act of hope can set your world turning again. As she sits in the quiet, Grace feels a sense of gratitude so deep it aches. For Sunny, for Lily, for Anna, who now visits more often, drawn home not just by duty but by joy. For the friends and neighbors who answered her call when she was lost. For every stranger who dared to hope, or to say yes, or to offer kindness without expectation. Grace looks down at Sunny, who thumps her tail softly, and wonders how many other people are out there, waiting for a second chance, hoping for a sign that it's not too late. How many Sunnys are waiting for a home? How many Graces are waiting for a reason to open their doors, their hearts, their lives? She knows now, with certainty, that it only takes one gentle word, one brave act, one simple yes to light up the darkest night. She hopes that anyone hearing her story, or watching the golden retriever at the center of it all, might find their own reason to say yes, to risk love, to offer help, to believe in new beginnings. The porch light glows against the growing darkness, casting a golden circle around Grace and Sunny. Inside, the house is quiet, but alive with memory and promise. Outside, the world stretches wide, filled with possibility. And so Grace offers her story to anyone who needs it, to anyone waiting for a second chance, or for the courage to give someone else theirs. She invites them into the warmth and the light, and hopes they'll find comfort, inspiration, or just the strength to take the first step. Because sometimes, all it takes is one gentle word to change a life. And sometimes, the life you change is your own.